From next year, the amount of money from your pay that will go into superannuation is set to increase. It's already law, actually. It'll go from the current 9.5% to 10% in July next year, then up to 12% by 2025. But the Morrison government isn't sure it wants to proceed, and that could set up a row with Labor going into the next election about take-home pay versus retirement incomes. Paul Keating has been Australia's leading champion of compulsory superannuation as the central means of funding retirement.
The elusive Paul Keating popped up in public again today.
I suggested by the year 2000 we reach a national benchmark where each and every employee has a contribution to superannuation equal to 12% of wage and salary income.
Australia had its new Prime Minister.
When Keating finally claimed the Prime Ministership, he continued to drive home the imperative.
9% of employer contributions for superannuation.
And eventually took to the 1996 election a promise to increase superannuation contributions to 15%. That increase was never fully realised because John Howard and later Tony Abbott were not keen.
Money that would otherwise be squirreled away in superannuation funds will instead be in the pockets of workers.
Next year, legislated increases to the rate of superannuation contributions are due to start, but the question is whether the Morrison government may try to undo them. On Friday, the government released its retirement income review conducted by the Treasury. It says the weight of evidence suggests the majority of increases come at the expense of growth in take-home wages. The Reserve Bank Governor shares that concern.
If this increase goes ahead, I would expect wage growth to be even lower than it otherwise would be.
The government says it won't make a decision about next year's increase until the May federal budget.
We'll make a decision about that in light of current circumstances before that scheduled increase takes place.
The former Prime Minister Paul Keating is with me in the Sydney studio. Good to see Mr Keating.
Good to see you, Lee.
What do you think will happen if Australia does not increase the rate of superannuation contributions?
But before we do that, let's go to the main report, the main point of the report, which has had little publicity. You see, the government released the report on the day they released the Afghanistan revelations. The point was not for the government not to have people focus on the central finding. They wanted the report to say that super was sort of in trouble, right? Here's the first line. The Australian retirement income system is effective, sound, and its costs are broadly sustainable. And the second line says, without compulsory superannuation, middle income earners would not save enough for retirement. So the report, there's the report, there it is, point one. In other words, the report, the review has confirmed the universality of superannuation, its compulsory nature, and of course the Libs hate that. You know, they wanted to bury it under the Afghanistan thing. You know, and
well, it does.
And of course, this is the point about a public broadcaster. All those people watching us tonight most people have got superannuation. Are often worried about it because of all the nonsense that's run in the newspapers. But here it is, the Australian retirement income is effective, sound, and its costs are broadly sustainable.
Well, the rest of that sentence goes on to say, but the evidence suggests there are areas where the system can be improved.
Oh, any system could be improved, of course, yeah.
You mentioned, you know, the average person who might be watching tonight and thinking about their super. What would you say to an Australian who said to you, I get what you're saying about needing money for my retirement, but I need money right now because I've got rent to pay and I've got kids and it's my money and why shouldn't I have it now if I want it and let later worry about later?
Well, the answer is, the report gave the answer. They said for every 10,000 that was allowed out in the early release program, for someone in their 30s it cost them 100,000 later. So there's a tenfold increase in leaving it in because of the compounding. So and now we're talking about the 0.5% goes, on 1 July goes from 9.5 to 10. The 0.5% is $8 a week, 2 cups of coffee. So for 2 cups of coffee, people are supposed to walk away from their future. And of course, the other thing the Libs are up to is in the report. I'll just read this to you. What they want people to do, they say this. If the SG rate remained at 9.5%, and people made more efficient use of their retirement savings, many would have higher replacement rates than they would have under the 12% of yesterday at 12%. And what they mean by that is accessing home equity. So the idea is this, that you can do better than 9.5, you can just keep 9.5, you don't get 12, but you've got to eat your house. You've got to eat your own house by reverse mortgaging your house.
But then this goes to a point, and let me ask you, is this what you originally had in mind when you designed it? People now tend to live off their investments, and when they die, they have their house or they have most of their super that they've kept, which they then pass on to their kids. Doesn't that bake in inequality? Because if you're rich, then you've got an asset to pass on your kids, but if you're poor and you actually have to run down your savings, then your kids get nothing.
Well, look, I don't think you can blame the system. People have all sorts of choices. Lots of people will want to, but I mean, the idea that a report endorsed by the government is putting about that, look, by the way, you don't need more than 9.5%, but you should start reverse mortgaging your house. In other words, give the kids nothing, eat the house, and then you don't have to go above 9.5. Now, just remember this, Lee, there's been no increase in real wages for now 8 years. None. There's been a 10% improvement in labour productivity, and the legislation for the super is passed. People have earned the superannuation. They've earned the 2.5%. The employers are going to pay it. Look, today the stock market was 6,500 on the index. You know why? Because the wage share in GDP is falling and the profit share is rocketing.
So
that's why.
Let me ask you to address the point that we heard the Reserve Bank Governor make, and that's made in this report too, which is that if you increase the rate of compulsory superannuation, it's going to result in lower wage growth.
Just nonsense. Look, the Reserve Bank hasn't hit its inflation target in 10 years. It hasn't hit its wage target in 10 years. You know, and here they are, the height of them, up saying, oh, you know, if you know, you get an increase in wages. The argument runs, if you get an increase in super, you don't have it in wages. Okay, and if you don't have it in super, you do have it in wages. We've had no increase in superannuation since 2013, yet there's been no wage increases since 2013. I mean, it's the argument, in the long run, if you consume something and don't save and not consume, well, of course, you'll have less consumption over, say, 30 or 40 years. But over a short period of time, this is just a misreading of current conditions. And the Reserve Bank, the reverse bank, I call them, because they always get things wrong.
Where will the money come from to fund the extra increase in the superannuation rate?
It'll come from the profit share of companies which have now banked 10 percentage points of labour productivity unpaid as wages since 2012. So working people have, through their efforts, lifted productivity by 10%. Not a cent of it has gone to wages. And that is now legislated 2.5, a quarter of the 10. So we're saying to the government, well, look, there's 10% the companies have sat on. Why don't they give a quarter back?
So
2.5% back. $8 a week.
If you had to make that case to business to say, well, here's the economic case for you to give less of your profits to shareholders and more of it to your workers, what's the case for them?
The case is, look, Lee, we've got a country now that's got no real wages growth, right? It's got no population growth. The China premium is falling to pieces. No Chinese tourists, no Chinese kids, and now the Chinese government's got these trade bans on. We've got two great assets in Australia left, iron ore and superannuation. And the government wants to kill the superannuation. You know, I mean, really. Can I just make this other point? And this is a really important point in the report. The report says that the call by the budget, the call by the pension system on the budget will be down to 15. I'll just get the number 15.3%. 15.3%. In France and Germany, it's 9%. We've got now, with a massive increase in the age population, virtually doubling it, we're going to have the lowest call by any government, any country in the world upon the budget. And this is all because of superannuation. The reason why the budget call, the reason why the pension call on the budget is going to be this low is because of superannuation, self-provision.
So What do you think would happen if you left it to people to just manage their own investments and it wasn't compulsory? What do you think would happen?
Well, they stop saving. That's what the report says. It says, you know, without compulsory superannuation, middle-income earners would not save enough for retirement. The countries, this is not just Australians, this is true all around the world. Unless you are compulsorily required to do it, you won't do it.
So then what do you think would happen, to go back to my first question, what do you think would happen in Australia if we don't increase the rate of superannuation contribution?
If we don't, the profit share will simply rise, and it will cost people in the long run in terms of their. Well, you work it out, Lee. 2.5% is a quarter of 9.5. So, if you had 400,000 in super today, you would have 500. If you're just starting out, you'll have a quarter more, because 2.5% super is about roughly a quarter of 9.5, right? So you take a quarter out, you'll end up with a quarter less at the end, and that's going to mean, probably for most people, probably about $150,000.
You mentioned before that you don't see, when you look at recent history in Australia, a relationship between superannuation and wages. What do you think is the answer to growing wages in Australia, which have been flat for so long?
Well, the enterprise bargaining system I introduced lifted real wages by 20% in Australia, by 70%, I'm sorry, in Australia since 2000 and since 1996. It rose by that sum. But the enterprise bargaining system got mucked up by John Howard's work choices. You know, he went chasing after the safety net. That's women in retail, kids in shops. He wanted to knock them off, right? You know where that ended. He lost the government and lost his seat. The Gillard government came back with a response. I think that response is too legalistic. Enterprise bargaining doesn't work as it should do, as I designed it to do. And I think if we went back to that, we would find we would do that. But the other thing is, the Reserve Bank kept unemployment too high for too long through its policies. And as a consequence, we never had that fillip. If you get unemployment down low, wages tend to rise. If unemployment is high, wages don't move as much. And because of its conservatism, the Reserve Bank kept unemployment higher for about a decade than needed.
Do you think that the pandemic and the drastic change in economic circumstances that it's caused around the world give any rise to an argument for deferring an increase in the rate of superannuation contribution?
None whatsoever, none. This is the first year since Governor Phillip came into Sydney Harbour that we hold more assets abroad than foreigners hold in us. The first year. We're unique. We're going to be, with Germany and Japan, a capital exporter for the first time in history. So it's a real measure of national resilience to be not having a begging bowl out funding your current account deficit. And of course, it goes as simple as this, Lee. Put more money into savings, into super, you get more investment. If we want more employment, more GDP, more investment, you make the super pool bigger.
If you want that kind of investment, though, the superannuation funds need certainty, which means they presumably need to not have people able to withdraw on their superannuation funds early. They need to have certainty in the policy environment. Well,
preservation is... See, the thing about compulsion and preservation are the two keys. And I said that is not draining the bath. That is not taking money out for housing deposits, not taking money out for education or health, but leaving it in there to compound for a retirement income. That's the whole point of the tax concessions.
Superannuation is just another word for saving, right? Compulsory saving. Because we're in a recession, the government wants people spending money to stimulate the economy. Wouldn't putting more money into the national savings via superannuation run counter to that?
You're talking about such small amounts. Do you think $8 a week is going to upset the employment equation in Australia? I mean, half a percentage point is worth, for someone on about $65,000 to $70,000, $8 a week, 2 coffees. So, oh no, those 2 coffees are going to wreck us. You have those 2 coffees, we're all in trouble. You know, this is the rubbish the libs go on with. You know, have a look. By the way, just have a look at the old Fairfax newspapers today. It's replete with stories. The Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, the Financial Review, all all trying to bag the 9.5%, but not any one of them reporting what I was able to say to you at the outset: the Australian retirement system is effective, sound, and its costs are broadly sustainable. Now, I'm not saying that's there because Peter Costello is the chairman of Channel 9. I don't know and can't say that he has an influence on the policy, but given that he's always knocked off super, knocked the 12% off in 1996 and encouraged hockey to knock it off in 2013, and it would now be encouraging the current Treasurer to do the same, all I can say is, you know, if we could get some real editorial independence into broadsheet newspapers, or what used to be broadsheets, we'd be a mile in front.
Mr. Keating, thank you for your time.
Okay.